As long as I can remember, I've always loved the look of antique books with their embossed or debossed titles and designs. But it wasn't until I started making books that I wondered, how in the world did they make those designs? So I did a little digging. But stay with me, there's a point, I promise. Back in the early 1800s, book cover design was limited because of the technology and the tools that they had. At the time, they would use heated metal rolls, usually made out of brass or iron, to imprint these decorative elements into the covers and spines of leather books. But by the 1830s, there was a new invention, and it was called the Imperial Arming Press. It was a huge, powerful machine that was capable of imprinting designs by using large metal stamps, and it could impress the entire front cover of a book, and it could even add gold or colored ink into the design. So fancy schmancy. At this point, maybe some of you can see where I'm going with all this. Obviously, I don't have an Imperial Arming Press. So how could I, a lowly civilian, possibly go about reproducing this type of book cover? Well, your mileage may vary depending on the tools you have access to. But I've been experimenting with some techniques to make some book cover designs that look like these. Through a fair amount of trial and a heck of a lot of error, I was able to figure some things out, and I ended up with some, I'm going to say, pretty decent results. So today I would like to show you how I went about making covers like this, and this, and this. You might remember that earlier this year, the xTool company sent me one of their M1 laser/vinyl cutting machines to test out and review. So in the Your Mileage May Vary category, you may or may not have access to a laser engraver. But is it absolutely necessary to have a laser engraver to make a cover? Well, not necessarily, with some exceptions. So I wanted to break down some of these steps and talk about that and the different options that you may have. If you were looking to make a cover like this one that has an intricate cutout, feasibly, I think you could do this with a steady hand and a sharp X-Acto knife. But then that is going to be out of the realm of possibility for me because I have arthritis in my hands, and so there is no possible way that would happen. Happily, because I do have the laser engraver, I was able to use it to cut out this design for me. I guess another option would be if you had a vinyl cutter, like a Cricut or a Brother Scan & Cut, Silhouette, Cameo, you know, those kinds. The issue with a vinyl cutter is that it has limitations when cutting thicker material. That being said, you could use a vinyl cutter to cut multiple thinner layers, then stack and glue those layers together to form one thicker cover material. Then if you took the time to sand the edges smooth to hide those layers and then finish off with a coat of paint, I think you could successfully replicate this kind of a cover. Where the laser comes in super handy is when I want to alter a finished book like this one. This is a book that I made previously. It was kind of a prototype because I was grunging up some fabric and, you know, just kind of a testing book. So I continued testing on this book, and I wanted to use it to see if I could engrave a design on the cover. So first I put some transfer tape onto the front cover of this book, and that serves a couple of purposes. One is that I could mark on that tape, mark the center with a pencil, because the M1, that engraving machine, has a camera on the inside, and so it will take a picture of whatever you place inside of the engraver, and then I was able to center my design where I wanted it on the book cover. The tape also serves as a mask to protect the part of the cover that I didn't want the gold paint to be on. So I only wanted the gold paint to be where the engraving was. So after the laser,
which we called a laser,
did its engraving, it engraved through that tape, so it removed it, and then it went on to engrave down into the cover of the book. I don't know if you can see how it's like indented. So then when I went over the top with some of the fabric, the gold fabric paint, then that masking tape, that transfer tape, protected the rest of the cover while I put the paint into the design. If you don't have a handy dandy laser engraver, it would definitely take a lot more time to recreate something like this, but I think it could be done, kind of. Let me explain. What I would do would be either by hand or hopefully with a vinyl cutter, if you have one, would be to cut out whatever your design is with some thin chipboard. Then glue that thin chipboard design onto a piece of book board for your front cover. Then when you're covering your book cover with your book cloth or cover material, you could use a bone folder or a ball stylus to work the fabric down into the design as you're gluing it down, like I did on this one. So you might be able to see how part of the design is indented. So that's what I did with this one. Is I did have the laser engraver engrave this design into a piece of board, but if I didn't and I just had it cut out either by hand or with a vinyl cutter, then I would glue that thin chipboard with the design in it to the top of whatever board I'm going to use for the book cover. Then when I'm putting this book cloth onto the outside, gluing it on, I would just have to make sure and take my time and carefully work that fabric down into that recessed part as I'm gluing it down. And I have to use enough glue to keep this fabric glued down, but not too much that it would seep through. I think it's a Goldilocks moment. Not too much, not too little, but it definitely works. I guess the tricky part would be if you wanted this recessed design to be a different color like I did on this book with the gold. I think it could be done. I guess what you could try would be to cut out the design again, either by hand or with the vinyl cutter, using maybe like a cardstock or a stencil card, and then lay that over the top of your book after your book cloth is all glued on and everything's all dry. Then lay it over kind of like a stencil, and then maybe very carefully paint through that stencil, and the stencil could protect the parts that you don't want painted. Depending on the design you were going to be using, I think it could be done. This one has a bunch of areas where it would be separate from, they're like little pieces. So it would be hard to get all the little pieces situated. But if the stencil was in one piece, like a real stencil, so like something like this where the stencil is in one piece, and if you lined it up with the same design, then I think it would be easier. However, this one would not be cut out like a stencil. This particular design would have a bunch of little pieces. So that would be harder. Although, who am I to say you couldn't do it? You would just have to be really careful and patient. Here is a book cover, and it was just from an old book cover. See, it's from a textbook of some kind. So this is an experiment I did where I was etching this design into the cover. It's not engraved so much as it is etched. I didn't have the laser engraver totally engrave and eat away the book cloth on this. It just kind of etched a design into it instead. So I basically used a lower power as opposed to this one, where I used a higher power and it actually, you know, engraved and dug down and went through and took away the book cloth and part of the book board itself. This one, it was just kind of etched into the surface. And I did this because I would like to do some experimenting with perhaps some stain or maybe a paint wash, which is like, you know, half paint, half water or whatever ratio, and see how it looks after I do some different finishes on a book cover. Just to play around with. It's just something else that I kind of threw in there after I was done with some of these and was just playing around with. And this one too, see if I can get the camera to do its thing here. So I had this pattern engraved into this, you know, old book cover. What I did on part of it was, before I peeled away the tape, I painted where the engraver took away the tape, you know, the design. But I only did it on part of the cover because I wanted to see what it looked like just engraved and not like paint added to it. And it just kind of leaves a darkened pattern, which is also kind of cool. So whether or not you use paint to fill in the design, I still think it looks neat just engraved, whether you paint it or you don't paint it. But anyway, that was some of the experiments that I was doing with the laser. Like I said, I wanted to give you options if you wanted to perhaps try it by hand or maybe with a vinyl cutter. Okay, so last but not least, I was able to play around with the laser for building some miniatures. Isn't this cute? Okay, so I used some free online tools to design this apothecary-ish style chest, maybe apothecary slash postal, I don't know. It has little teeny tiny drawers. I did not have any thin wood planks left in my stash, so I improvised by using a piece of mat board. And on one side of the mat board, I glued on some patterned cardstock, and then I glued a piece of black cardstock to the other side. Then the drawers are made out of a thinner material, and that is just a thin chipboard that I painted black on the front and the back. Then I had the laser cut out all the pieces for me. Putting together the cabinet itself took, maybe 5 minutes. That was the easy part. Putting together the drawers, on the other hand, took a little bit longer because there's 20 of them. And then the little handles, the little poles, these are old upholstery tacks that I snipped down with some little wire snips, you know, some little metal cutters. And if you remove the drawers, or remove a couple of them, you might be able to see the patterned paper that I used on one side of that mat board. Because you know how fancy people will pattern the back of a cabinet or bookshelf, or, you know what I mean, fancy people. I don't know why I said fancy people. Anyway, but yeah, I thought this was a lot of fun. When I have more time, I really want to design some more furniture. I've really been itching to make another book nook. So that kind of has been going through my mind. And because I have the laser now, hopefully it will help me to be able to get some things done that I've been finding increasingly difficult because of my arthritis. You know, I guess that's just the way it is. Stuff happens to us, and I'm just thankful that I have the laser to do some of the harder work for me. Is it necessary to have in all cases, in all instances, for all projects? No, you can absolutely figure out a way to do it by hand or maybe with a vinyl cutter, but I am thankful that I have it at the moment. Well, I think that was all I wanted to show you in this video, but I hope this video served as some inspiration, maybe sparked some ideas maybe that you want to try, whether you're into laser engraving or you're not. Speaking of which, the links underneath this video are affiliate links, and I just wanted to make sure to mention that in case anybody wanted to check out the laser engravers at the xTool website. Thank you all for hanging out with me today. I wish you all an excellent evening, and I will see you all really, really soon in the next video. Bye, guys.